Well, the Managing Director and CEO of the Nigerian Education Loan Fund, Akintunde Sawyerr, joins me now. Thank you so much for joining us on the news. He joins from our Lagos studios. Mr. Sawyerr.
Thank you for having me here, Lady Adesua. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Well, you are the man in the eye of the storm. You have seen the ICPC's correction that no discrepancies have been confirmed and no diversion has been proven yet. Still, this doesn't negate the public alarm triggered. Nigerians still want to know, how did a student loan scheme meant to relieve hardship become clouded by confusion, reports of illegal deductions, missing billions? How do you explain the confusion, Mr. Sawyerr?
Great. Well, thank you. First of all, let me say I'm not the man in the eye of the storm. The people in the eye of the storm are Nigerian students who've been waiting for a scheme like this whilst they've been in the storm for many years. And the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, GCFR, has made this possible. So the storm is really with the students. People like us are not in the eye of the storm. But moving on from there, I think what we need to appreciate is that funds have been made available for students to be able to access tertiary education in Nigeria. And I'll tell you, to date, we've had 203 billion naira released to the Nigeria Education Loan Fund. Of that 203 billion naira, we've disbursed 54 billion naira. 30 billion of that has gone directly to the institutions as fees or institutional charges on behalf of the students who have applied and have been approved. So we've taken the fees off the table for those students. 24 billion has gone to upkeep, which is funds that are paid directly to the students' account, their individual accounts, at a rate of 20,000 naira every month. So 54 billion has been paid out. 203 billion has been received by the fund. We've expended about 30% of the funds that we've received. So there's no storm. You know, essentially somebody at the Independent Corrupt Practices Commission made an error in making a statement, and a storm was created in a teacup. And that's essentially where we are. There are no missing funds. There are no diversion of funds by NEL Fund. Having said that, there have been challenges with students receiving no value in some cases from institutions that have been paid already. In other words, we've paid funds to institutions and the students haven't recognized, they haven't been given free access to classes. This is in the minority. In most cases, this has happened for students. They've been able to access classes, but of course, you know, for every student who can't access a class or doesn't receive their upkeep, it's 100% chaos for them. And those are the ones that we're working to fix. Okay. And of course, if there are errant institutions that are not allowing students to gain access to education, then, you know, you talked about the Minister of Education summoning a meeting. They will be severely sanctioned.
Great.
I discourage any institution that is not giving value to the students and has received value from NEL Fund to desist from it immediately.
That is such a relief, Mr. Sawyerr. But you reeled out some figures. Thank you for doing that, because it takes me to my next question. They are totally different from the figures that the ICPC released. Do you insist that these were also errors on the part of the ICPC? I mean, you mentioned about 54 billion naira, if I'm wrong, that has been disbursed so far. The ICPC says you have received almost 20 billion, 200 billion, beg your pardon, and then you have disbursed only about 44 billion naira. Can you clarify these figures for us? Okay,
so let me restate the figures that we have, and we've shared this with the ICPC. We've received 203 billion naira. So according to what you said just now, the ICPC says we've received 200 billion naira. Okay, so they've said 200, we say 203. I don't know where the approximations might be coming from. You say the ICPC says that we've disbursed 44 billion. We say we've disbursed 54 billion. These are moving figures, by the way. So the figures of disbursement change because we are disbursing every month. But look, these figures are not far off, and it's not uncommon to have these sorts of discrepancies. However, what I can tell you is that there are no missing billions, there are no missing millions, and there are no missing thousands. The funds are fully audited, they're fully visible, we're very, very transparent. We have a very rigorous approval and disbursement process that is visible to all. And we're not concerned about our practices and the way we're doing about things. What we are concerned about is students who may not be receiving value. The storm is for students who are not receiving value. And we work day and night tirelessly to make sure that we can fix our systems so that, a student who's patiently waiting for 20,000 naira, only 20,000 naira can get those funds. Because for that student, those 20,000 naira monthly installments mean everything. We can talk about billions all we like. At the end of the day, it's about, the few thousand that keep people going when they're studying for a better future.
Indeed, after all, that was the whole goal of Mr. President in establishing this scheme. But let's talk about those students that you talk about. There are allegations of illegal deductions by about 51 universities, with students reportedly losing between 3,500 naira and 30,000 naira. How did this deduction happen, and were you aware of them? The report said this is between the institutions and the banks. What can you tell us about this?
So look, what I can tell you about this is simply this. Look, the National Orientation Agency went out on a positive exercise to identify how this scheme has affected the lives of students. In their field exercise to find beneficiaries, they discovered a number of students who claimed that they hadn't received value in terms of their fees, or they hadn't received value in terms of their upkeep, or something hadn't quite worked for those students. They were sufficiently concerned about the numbers of those that they came across and these institutions where this kind of thing seemed to be prevalent, that they flagged it. The Director General of the NOA raised it with me. Of course, we are the primary agency that students come to complain about various things that happen to them. So we have some data, some information about how this is working for students. Excuse me, my earpiece fell off, so let me just correct that. So we have, quite a lot of information that's coming through to us, and it seemed to corroborate what the National Orientation Agency was saying. So we said, okay, this warrants further investigation. And we know that the ICPC and the EFCC, who, by the way, gave us 50 billion intervention fund, proceeds of crime funds, have a natural interest. They're a key stakeholder in this process and in this project. So these organizations have been with us for quite a long time. And of course, they look at how we're disbursing funds, and they follow the money. They follow the money to its destination. And when NOA came up with this, they decided to take a closer look. Remember also that there are some students out there who are petitioning the ICPC and the EFCC saying, we haven't received the funds. Where are they? So there's a natural concern, because what we don't want is a small issue to fester and grow and become a trend. And so it's very welcome that these investigations are going on. Okay. What I cannot do is tell you whether there are 51 institutions, 68 institutions, 3 institutions, because we're not an investigative agency. We only investigate the specific issues that come to us. But we are going to start looking much more closely at this, because we don't want it to grow. And we're going to work with the Federal Ministry of Education, who have administrative sanctions because they oversee the regulatory agencies that that manage the institutions.
All right, Mr. Sawyerr.
And of course, we're working, as I say, with the others who look at the illegal deduction issues. Thank you.
Indeed, we're almost out of time, and I would like you to keep your responses as brief as possible, if you can. There are those who would question your monitoring mechanisms. How did these deductions happen that NEL Fund wasn't aware in the first instance? What is your monitoring mechanism like? Secondly, you mentioned earlier that you had received about 200 billion, but you have disbursed about 54-something billion, moving fund as you described them. Why is there such a gap? Is it that people are not accessing these funds, or you're just taking your time to release the monies? Why is there such a gap between the money you have received so far and the money you have disbursed?
Okay, so thank you. So first of all, you asked about the monitoring systems that we're using, and you've asked me to be brief in my answers, and I'll try to be as brief as possible. Look, when we disburse funds, we follow the money to the bank that the recipient institution receives. We confirm to the students through their individual dashboard that funds have been released to their institution based on their application which has been approved, and that the funds have arrived in the bank account of their institution. So the students know, because on their dashboard it says disbursed. Okay, so that's essentially the primary way in which the students know. There is also an obligation on the institution as a responsible citadel of learning to allow students to access the learning that this provides. Because after all, once the money has been paid, the students should be given access. To move on very swiftly to your question around the gap between what we've received and what we've paid out. You know, we don't receive funds and just pay them out willy-nilly. We receive applications. We can't pay out against applications that haven't been received. We can't pay out against applications that haven't been verified. We can't pay out against applications that haven't been approved by us and by the institution. So the gap remains. There will always be a gap because we must verify, you know, the applications as being bona fide and you know, qualifying or eligible before we can either pay it to the student or to the institution. So that gap is one that is there. I think it's to be commended because what has happened here is that the president has made sure that there's sufficient funding in the kitty at all times for us to be able to fulfill the obligations. You know, if the gap was the other way, in other words, if we had applications that we can't fulfill, we can't pay for, then we'd have a much bigger problem.
Indeed. Mr. Sawyerr, Nigerians and particularly students will be watching to see what happens next, particularly for the deducted funds of those indigent students. I mean, it's just a penny to keep them going in school. It's unimaginable that anybody will steal from indigent students. Mr. Akintunde Sawyerr is the Managing Director of NEL Fund. Thank you so much for your responses tonight on the news. We do appreciate your time.